So more than a verdict, how we see others shapes who we become. So who still belongs? There's a question that I've been kind of unable to shake. What do we do with people who have done real harm? Who have hurt someone, broken trust, committed a crime, and what do we think they deserve? What should happen to them? And when do we stop seeing them as fully human? So I've been thinking about this in part because I recently watched a documentary on the prison system in Norway and Sweden. And if you've seen anything, any of those documentaries, you know, they portrayed it, it seems a little more humane. The living quarters are cleaner, they have actual beds and televisions and all that kind of thing. So I wasn't surprised so much about that, but I was surprised at the people being interviewed in this documentary and their reaction. That's what surprised me. Because, again, these prisons were clean and visibly respectful. They looked more human than punitive, but people were appalled. They said things like, well, why should people who did all these terrible things get freshly painted walls, actual mattresses, actual pillows, TVs? Why should they get anything decent after what they did? This isn't supposed to be a resort or a hotel or some kind of country club. They did something terrible. They get what they deserve. And honestly, I wasn't surprised by that reaction because I think in a lot of ways, that is how our culture sees prison. If someone has done something awful, then prison should be awful. It should hurt and it should be miserable. But the more I sat with it, the more I realized the real difference wasn't the pillows or the TV. The real difference, again, was what was underneath it. So from what I understand, places like Norway and Sweden, the loss of freedom is the consequence. That's the sentence. The goal seems less about piling on suffering and more about treating people as people and sending them back to the world less broken than when they came in. So I'm not romanticizing prisons in Norway and Sweden or pretending they don't have their own bias or problems or anything, but it does appear, at least at the starting point, to be a little more humane. And I think in this country, we've built something very different. And I'm not going to unpack the whole history of mass incarceration this morning, but I think it matters that our prison system grew inside a country shaped by slavery, racial hierarchy, and exclusion. That has shaped who gets feared, who gets controlled, who gets punished the hardest, and whose suffering we barely even notice. So to me, prison raises a deeper question. What do we think people deserve once they've done harm? Is it the loss of freedom? Is that the consequence? Or do we believe they deserve humiliation and abandonment and the slow stripping away of dignity? And I'm not talking about prison only as something out there. I'm talking about it because it sharpens a question many of us face in our own lives. What do we do with people after they've hurt us, disappointed us, betrayed us, or caused us real harm? When someone hurts us, really hurts us, what do we do with them? When trust has been broken, when it's your sister who lied to you or stole from you, or a friend who betrayed your confidence, do we still see them as a whole person? Do we still care what happens to them? Or do we let the whole relationship harden into judgment, contempt, or silence? And what do we do when that wound stays open? When the apology never comes, or it never comes in a way that we need it to, that it repairs the harm? Sometimes in our humanness, when we're really hurt by someone, we want them to feel what we're feeling. We somehow feel we need to sort of even the score of sorts so they understand. And I want to be clear that seeing someone's humanity does not mean we have to erase the harm they've done. It doesn't mean trust will be restored. It doesn't mean every relationship can or cannot be repaired, because boundaries can be very important. Consequences can be real, and some relationships are changed forever. But something shifts when the harm becomes the whole story we tell about someone. Once that happens, it gets a whole lot easier to not care what happens next. And maybe that's another hard question underneath all of this. When someone has hurt us deeply, we start to want their suffering to be endless? Do we start to believe, maybe or without even saying it out loud, that there should be no end to the consequences, no room for repair, no room for grace? I've seen that instinct in my own life too. I had a cousin who was really like a sister to me. We lived together and we were very close. I had a cousin who struggled with substance abuse for decades. And I want to be clear that addiction in families is complicated. Families get worn out. It can be challenging. Boundaries are necessary, so I'm not minimizing any of that. But what stayed with me was that over time, she stopped being seen as a whole person. She became the addiction, the problem, the one you didn't invite, the one people braced for, whether she had done anything or not. There were the sighs, the eye rolls, the disgust in their tone when people talked about her. And then when she was dying, it got even harder to watch. In the end, there was one family member at her bedside. Beyond that, it was just nurses, doctors, machines. And at one point, someone said to me, well, as if they were reporting on the weather, yep, another one drinks herself to death. Even her closest lifelong friend would not come to the funeral. There had been a lot of grief, too many drunken phone calls, too many years of chaos. By then, not showing up was her form of punishment. And I'd never forgotten that, because in that moment, her whole life got reduced to a verdict. Not grief, not tenderness, not sorrow, just a verdict. And that to me is where prison and our lives begin to meet. Not because they're the same, because they're not, but because they can come from that same place in us. The moment when someone has caused enough pain that we stop wondering who they are and start thinking about what they deserve. In a family, it might look like silence, contempt, cutting someone off, deciding there is nothing left to know. In prison, that same instinct becomes something more intentional, more public, more humiliating, more fully backed by the state. It becomes suffering made deliberate, suffering made official, suffering treated as if it were justice itself. And then there's that phrase, 3 hots and a cot. And it's such a telling phrase because it makes prison sound like no big deal. They get meals, they get a bed. What are they complaining about? No perks, no comfort, no sympathy. But prison is not a cheap motel. The punishment is the loss of freedom. And in our lives, the consequence may be the loss of trust, the loss of closeness, the loss of belonging. What troubles me is how often we want to add more to that, more shame, more humiliation, more damage, as if suffering has to keep going in order for it to count. That is not justice, that is damage. Sometimes we're also punishing the pain, the addiction, trauma, fear, desperation behind the harm. In our UU tradition, we talk about the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And prison is one of those places that gets tested. Not when the person is easy to love, not when their story is tidy, but when they've done harm, when they scare us, when every instinct in the culture says, write them off. And I think other traditions ask us the same question, but in different words. Buddhism reminds us that hatred doesn't end hatred. And in the Christian tradition, there's the line from Matthew, I was in prison and you visited me. To me, that line means the person in prison does not get to become invisible. A prison ID number can tell us when someone entered the system. It can tell you the sentence, but it cannot tell you who they are. And that, too, is a form of punishment. Taking not only their freedom, but their identity, reducing them to a number. So no, prison and family life are not the same thing, but I think they both reveal the same moral danger. The danger is not accountability or boundaries. The danger is not even the truth that some harm changes a relationship forever. The danger is that we stop seeing someone as fully human. And once that happens, it gets a lot easier to call our contempt wisdom, our indifference justice, and our judgment righteousness. But maybe the deepest question here isn't just what another person deserves. Maybe it's what kind of person I become when I need their suffering to go on. What happens to my spirit when I get pulled more and more towards judgment, towards punishment, towards the refusal to let something be more than the harm that has been caused? At some point, the punishment is no longer about them. It begins to shape us too. So maybe that's the question I want to leave you with. Who still belongs? What do we still see as human even after harm? I don't have the answer for that, only this. I don't think justice asks us to stop caring what happens to people. I don't think accountability requires humiliation. And I don't think either prison or private pain should make us forget that another human being is still a human being. So may we be people who tell the truth about harm. May we protect what needs protecting. May we keep boundaries that need to be kept. And may we resist the easy move of turning another person into something and nothing more than a verdict. Because the world already has plenty of that. What it needs, maybe, is more people willing to say, even here, even now, even after harm, this person is still human, and human dignity still matters. And may it be so.
If you like this video, please like us on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and click on the bell to be notified whenever we post a new video. Thank you.